Life has a funny way of teaching us that sometimes the people we love the most can hurt us the deepest. This is a story about Raj, a brilliant young doctor who had everything going for him. Well, almost everything. At 32, Raj wasn't just any doctor, he was one of the youngest cardiothoracic surgeons at Boston General Hospital. His colleagues often joked that his hands were blessed by the gods themselves, given how skillfully he performed even the most complicated heart surgeries. But if you asked Raj about his success, he'd simply smile and credit it all to one person, his mother, Anjali. You see, Raj's story wasn't always filled with success and achievement. 22 years ago, his world had turned upside down when his father suddenly passed away from a heart attack. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now he saved people from the very thing that had taken his father away. That tragic night had changed everything for their small family of 3, reducing it to just mother and son. Anjali had been a high school teacher back then, and everyone had advised her to remarry or send Raj to live with relatives. A single woman can't raise a son properly, they'd say. But Anjali wasn't just any mother. She had looked at her 10-year-old son's face, wiped his tears, and made a promise they would face the world together. And face it they did. Anjali took on extra tutoring jobs after school hours. She would grade papers late into the night, prepare for her classes, and still somehow manage to attend every single one of Raj's school events. Their small apartment above the local grocery store became their fortress, filled with love, dreams, and the smell of Anjali's special chicken soup that she'd make whenever Raj was studying for big tests. "Mom, you need to rest," young Raj would say, finding her asleep on their worn-out couch, surrounded by student papers. "Just 5 more papers, beta," she'd reply with a tired smile, her reading glasses slightly askew. But Raj knew better. She would finish all the papers, no matter how late it got. As years passed, their bond grew stronger. Raj excelled in his studies, driven not just by his own ambition, but by the desire to make his mother proud. When he got accepted into medical school with a partial scholarship, Anjali sold her beloved gold bangles, her last wedding jewelry, to help pay for his education. She never told him, but Raj found out years later from their neighbor, Mrs. Kapoor. Now, living in his luxurious Boston apartment, Raj had made sure his mother never had to work again. He bought her a beautiful house in the suburbs, insisting she retire early. Their Sunday dinners became a sacred ritual. He'd drive to her place, and they'd cook together, just like old times. Anjali would update him about the latest neighborhood gossip, and he'd share stories from the hospital, carefully editing out the more stressful parts to not worry her. To everyone who knew them, Raj and Anjali were the perfect mother-son duo. She was the proud mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's success, and he was the devoted son who had made all her sacrifices worthwhile. Their friends often said they restored their faith in family values in these modern times. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. And for Raj and Anjali, that test came in the form of Priya, a kind-hearted pediatric nurse who would soon turn their perfectly orchestrated world upside down. Neither of them knew it yet, but their relationship was about to face its biggest challenge, one that would force them to question everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and sacrifice. As Raj drove home that evening from another successful surgery, he couldn't have imagined how his life was about to change. He was content, successful, and had the unwavering love of his mother. What more could anyone want? But fate had other plans, and sometimes the things we don't know we're missing are the ones that end up meaning everything. His phone buzzed with his mother's usual evening call. "Don't forget to eat dinner, beta," Anjali's loving voice came through the speaker. "And wear your blue tie tomorrow. It brings you luck." "Yes, ma," Raj replied with a fond smile, not knowing that soon such simple, peaceful moments would become precious memories of a time before everything changed. They say love finds you when you least expect it. And for Raj, it happened on what started as just another busy Tuesday at Boston General Hospital. The emergency room had called about a 7-year-old boy with a complicated heart condition, and Raj was rushing down the corridor when he quite literally ran into Priya. "I am so sorry," she exclaimed, quickly steadying the medical charts she'd almost dropped. Her name badge read Priya Mehra, pediatric nurse, and there was something about her apologetic smile that made Raj pause for a moment longer than necessary. "No, it was my fault," he replied, helping her gather a few papers that had scattered. "I was running to the pediatric ward, room 302. Pryor asked, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Little Aiden with the heart murmur. I'm actually heading there myself." That first meeting turned into a 3-hour surgery where Raj discovered that Pryor wasn't just any nurse. She had this incredible way with children, keeping little Aiden calm before the procedure with stories about superhero doctors who fixed hearts. Throughout the surgery, her efficiency and attention to detail impressed Raj, who was used to working with experienced surgical nurses. "You're really good with kids," Raj mentioned afterward, as they were both updating the patient charts. It was nearly 8 p.m., and most of the day staff had already left. "They're the best part of my job," Pryor replied, stifling a yawn. "Though sometimes I think I learn more from them than they do from me." "How so?" "Well," she smiled, putting down her pen, "just today, Aiden taught me that Batman could probably perform heart surgery if he really wanted to, because, and I quote, he's Batman." That made Raj laugh. A genuine, heartfelt laugh he hadn't experienced in a while. Something about Pryor's presence felt refreshingly real in the sterile hospital environment. Over the next few weeks, they kept running into each other. Sometimes it was in the cafeteria, where Pryor would share her homemade lunches because, as she put it, no one should survive on hospital sandwich wraps. Other times, they'd catch each other during rounds, exchanging quick smiles that somehow brightened their hectic days. Their first real conversation happened during a night shift over 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. Pryor talked about growing up in a small town in New Jersey where her parents ran a local restaurant. She'd known she wanted to work with children since she was 12 when she helped care for her younger cousin during a long illness. "What about you?" she asked, genuinely interested. "How does someone decide to become a heart surgeon?" Reg found himself opening up about his father's death, something he rarely discussed with anyone. "I guess I wanted to make sure other kids didn't lose their dads the way I lost mine," he admitted quietly. Pryor didn't respond with the usual pity or awkward sympathy. Instead, she shared her own story about losing her grandmother to cancer and how it had shaped her approach to patient care. "Sometimes the hardest things in life give us our purpose," she said softly. Their relationship developed naturally, like a flower slowly blooming. Coffee breaks turned into lunch dates, which evolved into evening walks through the Boston Common after their shifts. Pryor introduced Raj to her favorite hole-in-the-wall bookstore, where they'd spend hours on weekends browsing through old medical books and mystery novels. Raj found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone else, like how sometimes he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of holding people's lives in his hands, or how he secretly enjoyed watching cooking shows even though he could barely make toast without burning it. "That's actually adorable." Pryor laughed when he confessed this, and then proceeded to teach him how to make a proper omelette in his barely used kitchen. What struck Raj most about Pryor was her independence. Unlike many people who seemed impressed or intimidated by his success, she was completely comfortable in her own skin. She loved her job as a nurse and had no desire to be anything else. "It's not about the title," she'd say, "it's about making a difference in people's lives." 6 months passed like this, filled with small moments that meant everything. The way Pryor would leave sticky notes with encouraging messages in his locker before difficult surgeries, how she remembered every patient's name and story, the sound of her laugh when he tried and failed to learn Indian classical dance moves from YouTube videos because she'd mentioned missing her childhood dance classes. But as Raj's feelings for Pryor grew deeper, so did a nagging worry in the back of his mind. He hadn't told his mother about her yet. Somehow, their Sunday dinners had remained a separate part of his life, untouched by this new happiness he found. Every time Anjali asked about his day or his work, Raj would carefully edit out any mention of Pryor. It wasn't that he was ashamed, quite the opposite, but something held him back, a strange fear he couldn't quite name. "You know you'll have to tell her eventually," Pryor said one evening, as they sat on her small apartment balcony, watching the sunset. She never pushed the issue, but she understood family complications better than most. "I know," Raj sighed, holding her hand a little tighter. "It's just complicated." What Raj didn't say was that for the first time in his life, he was living something that was completely his own, separate from his mother's influence. And perhaps that's what scared him most, the realization that his heart now had room for a different kind of love, one that would inevitably change everything. Sunday dinners had always been special for Raj and his mother, but this particular Sunday felt different. The familiar smell of Anjali's biryani filled the house, but Raj's stomach was in knots. After months of dating Priya, he had finally decided to introduce her to his mother. "Bega, the pickle you brought last time is almost finished," Anjali called from the kitchen, completely unaware of how her son was pacing in the living room. "Next time, bring 2 jars." The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Raj was in the middle of a delicate heart surgery when his phone started buzzing repeatedly. The nurses exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew Dr. Raj never got calls during surgery unless it was an absolute emergency. By the time he finished the procedure, there were 15 missed calls from his mother. "Mom?" He called back immediately, his hands still trembling from the intense surgery. "What's wrong?" "Beta, I fell." Anjali's voice was weak. "I was trying to change the light bulb in the living room. I'm not sure if anything's broken, but it hurts so much." Raj's heart dropped. He cancelled his dinner plans with Priya and rushed to his mother's house, breaking several speed limits along the way. But when he arrived, he found Anjali sitting comfortably in her favorite armchair, watching her evening soap opera. "Oh, you're here." She brightened up. "I'm feeling much better now. Must have just been a bruise. Since you came all this way, why don't you stay for dinner? I made your favorite Rajma chawal." It took everything in Raj not to show his frustration. This was the 3rd emergency this month, and each time, the crisis mysteriously resolved itself the moment he arrived. As he sat down for dinner, his phone buzzed with a message from Priya. "Hope everything's okay with Auntie. Don't worry about dinner. We can reschedule." The message was understanding, as Priya always was, but Raj could sense the underlying hurt. This was supposed to be their 6-month anniversary dinner. Things got worse when Raj finally gathered the courage to tell his mother about their engagement plans. He hadn't officially proposed to Priya yet, but they had been discussing their future together. Marriage. Anjali's cup of tea clattered against its saucer. "But Beta, you hardly know her. And her family, running a restaurant, what will our relatives say?" "Mom, I love her," Raj tried to explain. "She's kind, intelligent, and makes me happy. Isn't that what matters?" "Happy?" Anjali's voice took on that dangerous quiet tone he remembered from childhood. "Was I not enough to make you happy? After everything I've done for you?" The guilt trip was familiar, but it still worked. Raj found himself stammering. "Of course you make me happy, Mom. This is different." "Different?" Tears welled up in Anjali's eyes. "I gave up everything for you. Every marriage proposal I received after your father died, I rejected them all for you. I lived only for you. And now this girl comes along, and suddenly I'm not enough." That night, Anjali orchestrated her masterpiece. She called all their relatives, crying about how her son was abandoning her for a girl who didn't match their status. Within hours, Raj's phone was flooded with messages from concerned aunts and uncles. At work, things weren't any better. Somehow, rumors started circulating about Priya. Some nurses whispered that she was only interested in Raj's money. Others suggested she had a questionable past. Raj knew these rumors were ridiculous. Priya was the most genuine person he knew, but the constant whispers were taking their toll. Anjali began showing up at the hospital more frequently, always with home-cooked food and a concerned expression. "Beta, you've lost weight," she would say loudly in the cafeteria. "Are you eating properly? Is someone taking care of you?" The way she emphasized someone made it clear who she was talking about. Other times, she would corner Priya's colleagues, asking leading questions about Priya's work ethic and personal life. Priya tried to stay strong through it all. "It's okay," she would say, even when it clearly wasn't. "She's your mother. She's just worried about you." But Raj could see the strain in her smile, the way she started second-guessing herself. The final straw came during a family gathering Anjali had organized. She had invited all their relatives, supposedly to celebrate Raj's recent successful surgery. But her real motive became clear when she started showcasing photos of suitable girls from good families. "Look, Beta, this is Dr. Mayner's daughter," she would say, loud enough for Priya to hear. "She's studying to be a neurosurgeon and comes from such a good family background." Priya excused herself early that evening. When Raj found her outside, she was trying hard not to cry. "I can handle the criticism," she said quietly. "I can handle the rumors. But watching you sit there while she parades other women in front of me, that's something else entirely." That night, as Raj drove home, his mind was in turmoil. He loved Priya, of that he was certain. But his mother's behavior was getting more extreme by the day. The woman who had once taught him about respect and dignity was now spreading rumors and orchestrating social humiliations. What Raj didn't know was that in her desperate attempt to protect him, Anjali was about to cross a line that would change everything. She had already hired a private investigator determined to find something, anything, that would prove Priya wasn't good enough for her son. And if she couldn't find something, well, she was prepared to create it. As Raj lay awake that night, torn between the two women he loved most in the world, he had no idea that his mother's manipulations were about to take an even darker turn. The woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a better life was now willing to sacrifice his happiness to keep him under her control. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Raj to make the hardest choice of his life. Late one night, in the quiet of her house, Anjali sat at her computer, staring at an email from someone named Kumar. He was a private investigator she'd hired 3 weeks ago, and his report was disappointing. "Ms. Mehra's background is clean," it read. "No criminal records, no hidden relationships, excellent work history, and strong community involvement." Anjali's hands trembled as she deleted the email. She had paid good money to find dirt on Priya, but there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The girl was exactly what she appeared to be, kind, honest, and genuinely in love with Raj. "No," Anjali whispered to herself. "I won't let her take my son away." That's when something inside Anjali snapped. If she couldn't find evidence against Priya, she would create it. The plan started small. A fake social media profile here, a doctored photo there. She spent hours learning about digital editing, watching tutorials late into the night while her neighbors slept peacefully. During the day, Anjali kept up appearances. She even started being nicer to Priya, which made Raj hopeful that things were improving. "See? Mom's coming around," he told Priya one evening. But Anjali's newfound pleasantness was just another manipulation. She needed everyone to believe she had accepted Priya before she launched her attack. Behind the scenes, her plan grew more elaborate. She hired people to take photos of Priya at work during her lunch breaks and on her way home. Normal, innocent photos that Anjali would later use to construct her lies. She created fake text messages, edited timestamps, and built an entirely false narrative. But her masterpiece was still to come. Through her network of family friends, Anjali discovered that Priya volunteered at a children's hospital in New Jersey every other weekend, something Priya had never hidden but hadn't mentioned to Raj because it was just part of her routine. This innocent detail became the foundation for Anjali's biggest lie. She hired an actor to pose as a patient's relative who would claim to have seen Priya there with a different family. She collected hospital visitor logs, altered dates, and created a complex web of false evidence suggesting Priya had a secret life. "It's for his own good," Anjali told herself as she organized the fake evidence in a folder. A mother knows best. One day, while sorting through her schemes, Anjali found an old photo album. There was Raj at 5 years old, sitting on her lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. Another showed them at his medical school graduation, his arms around her, both beaming with pride. For a moment, her hand hesitated over the folder of lies she'd created. But then she remembered seeing Raj and Priya together at the hospital cafeteria last week, how he looked at Priya the way he used to look only at his mother. How he had missed their weekly dinner twice this month because of date night. The jealousy and fear rushed back, stronger than ever. Anjali began spreading her lies carefully, strategically. A worried phone call to Raj's aunt about disturbing rumors she'd heard. A casual mention to the hospital administrators about concerns regarding Priya's weekend activities. Small seeds of doubt, planted where they would grow best. She paid people to write anonymous letters to the hospital board, raising questions about Priya's integrity. Each letter was carefully crafted to seem concerned rather than malicious. "We're only bringing this up because we care about the hospital's reputation," they would say. The pressure began to show on Priya. Strange looks from colleagues, whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the break room. Even some of her closest work friends started keeping their distance, unsure what to believe. Something weird is happening, Priya confided in Raj one evening. People are acting different around me. Even some of my patients' parents have requested different nurses. Raj tried to reassure her, but he couldn't help noticing the changes too. His mother, meanwhile, played the role of concerned parent perfectly. Beta, I'm worried about all these rumors, she would say, her voice dripping with fake concern. Where there's smoke, there must be fire, no. The final piece of Anjali's plan involved Kumar, the same private investigator who had failed to find dirt on Priya. She paid him extra to pretend he had discovered evidence of Priya's other life in New Jersey. The story was perfectly crafted, just detailed enough to be believable, just vague enough to be hard to disprove. As Anjali put the finishing touches on her scheme, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the person staring back at her. Where was the woman who had taught Raj about honesty and integrity? The mother who had worked so hard to give him good values? But she pushed these thoughts away. In her mind, she was protecting her son from a future of pain and disappointment. She was doing what any good mother would do. The fact that she had to create elaborate lies didn't matter. The end justified the means. What Anjali didn't realize was that her actions would have consequences far beyond what she intended. The web of lies she had spun would not only threaten to destroy Priya's life, but would also test the very foundation of her relationship with Raj. As she prepared to present her evidence to her son, she had no idea that her desperate attempt to keep him close would ultimately be the thing that drove him away forever. 2 weeks before the wedding, on a quiet Sunday evening, Anjali invited Raj over for dinner. The timing wasn't accidental. She knew Priya was working a night shift at the hospital. The dining table was set with all of Raj's favorite dishes: butter chicken, fresh naan, and the special dal that always reminded him of his childhood. Beta, there's something we need to discuss, Anjali said softly, pushing away her barely touched plate. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a thick manila envelope beside her chair. I've been trying to find the right way to tell you this. Raj looked up from his food, noticing the unusual tension in his mother's voice. What's wrong, Mom? It's about Priya. Anjali's voice cracked perfectly. She had practiced this moment countless times. I didn't want to believe it at first. I kept hoping I was wrong. She pulled out a stack of papers from the envelope, laying them on the table one by one. Photos of Priya at various locations in New Jersey. Hospital visitor logs with highlighted dates, screenshots of messages, a detailed report from the private investigator. What is all this? Raj's fork clattered against his plate as he picked up one of the photos. She's not who you think she is, Beta. Anjali touched his hand gently. I hired someone to look into her background because a mother knows when something isn't right. And what they found. For the next hour, Anjali wove her carefully constructed web of lies. She showed Raj evidence that Priya had another life in New Jersey, a different name, a different story. The private investigator's report suggested she was already married, with family obligations she had hidden from everyone. That's impossible. Raj stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I know Priya. She would never. Do you really know her? Anjali pressed. Think about it, Beta. Those weekend trips to New Jersey she claims are for volunteer work. The phone calls she takes in private. Haven't you ever wondered? Raj's mind raced back through his memories with Priya. The weekend volunteering she never talked much about. The times she seemed distracted or worried. Little things that had seemed innocent before now took on a darker meaning under his mother's careful manipulation. There's more. Anjali pulled out statements from witnesses, people she had paid to lie. Each account added another layer to the deception, making it harder and harder for Raj to distinguish truth from fiction. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. He wanted to call Priya to hear her deny everything. But a small voice in his head, shaped by months of his mother's subtle manipulation, whispered doubts. That night, Raj drove to the hospital, the manila envelope sitting like a weight on his passenger seat. He found Priya during her break, her face lighting up when she saw him, then falling as she noticed his expression. What's wrong? She asked, reaching for his hand. But Raj stepped back. I need you to explain something, His voice was hollow as he pulled out the photos and documents. "What is this, Priya?" Her face went from confusion to shock as she looked through the evidence. "This is nonsense," she said, her voice shaking. "These photos, yes, that's me at the Children's Hospital in New Jersey, but I told you I volunteer there. These messages, I've never seen them before. That signature, it's not even mine. Stop lying." Raj's voice echoed in the empty break room. "There are witnesses, Priya. People who've seen you there with your family." "What family?" Tears were streaming down Priya's face now. "My parents run their restaurant in Edison. You've met them. These documents are fake, Raj. Someone's trying to set me up." But the seeds of doubt had been planted too deep. Every denial from Priya seemed to confirm what his mother had suggested, that she was hiding something. The more she tried to explain, the more confused and angry Raj became. "I need time to think," he finally said, gathering the papers. I can't do this right now." "Raj, please," Priya caught his arm. "Think about who gave you these. Think about who benefits from destroying our relationship. I love you, and I have never lied to you." For a moment, looking into her tear-filled eyes, Raj almost believed her. But then he remembered all the evidence, the witness statements, the carefully constructed story his mother had planted in his mind. "The wedding is off," he said quietly, pulling away from her. "I'm sorry." He left Priya there in the break room, her sobs following him down the hallway. Nurses and doctors who had known them both as a happy couple watched in shock as he stormed out. That night, Raj sat in his dark apartment, staring at the engagement ring he had bought last week. It was supposed to be a surprise. He had planned to propose during their upcoming trip to the beach. Now the ring just reminded him of what he thought he had found and lost. His phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls from Priya, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. Each notification felt like a stab to his heart. Part of him wanted to believe her, wanted to rush back to the hospital and apologize, but his mother's voice echoed in his head. "A mother knows best, Beta. A mother always knows." What Raj didn't realize was that the truth was about to come out in a way nobody had expected. His mother's carefully constructed plan had one fatal flaw. She had involved too many people in her scheme, and one of them was about to develop a conscience that would shatter everything she had worked so hard to build. Kumar, the private investigator, couldn't sleep. For 3 nights straight, he'd been tossing and turning, haunted by the image of Priya's tears when he last saw her at the hospital. He was used to doing background checks, finding real evidence of wrongdoing. But what Anjali had made him do, creating fake documents, paying people to lie, that was different. The money she'd paid him sat untouched in his desk drawer. Every time he looked at it, he felt sick. He had a daughter about Priya's age. What if someone did this to her? Early Monday morning, Kumar made his decision. He gathered all the evidence of Anjali's scheme, the original photos before they were edited, the receipts from paid actors, the emails where she outlined her plan. His hands shook as he drove to Raj's apartment. Raj looked terrible when he opened the door, like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm not taking any cases right now," he said, assuming Kumar was a patient. "Dr. Raj, I'm Kumar," he said quietly. "The private investigator your mother hired. And there's something you need to know." For the next hour, Kumar laid out the truth. He showed Raj how each piece of evidence had been fabricated. The edited photos, the fake witness statements, the forged documents, everything Anjali had orchestrated to destroy Priya's reputation. But why? Raj's voice cracked as he stared at the proof of his mother's deception. Why would she do this? "She was afraid of losing you," Kumar said gently. "Sometimes love can make people do terrible things." Raj sat in stunned silence, memories flooding back. Priya's tears as she tried to explain, the hurt in her eyes when he wouldn't believe her, and his mother who had taught him about honesty and integrity, who had sacrificed everything for him, had created this elaborate web of lies. He drove to the hospital in a daze. The halls felt longer than usual as he walked to the pediatric ward. When he found Priya, she was reading a story to a young patient, her voice animated despite the dark circles under her eyes. "Priya," he called softly from the doorway. She looked up, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The little patient looked between them curiously. "Can we talk?" Raj asked. "Please." They'd found an empty consultation room. Raj placed Kumar's evidence on the table between them. "I'm so sorry," his voice broke. "I should have believed you." "I should have." "Stop." Prina held up her hand. Her voice was tired, defeated. "Do you know what hurts the most, Raj? Not the lies, not the rumors. What hurts is that you believed them. You knew me, knew my heart, and still chose to believe the worst." "I know," Raj whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I'm not sure I can," Priya said honestly. "At least, not right now." The hardest part came next. Raj drove to his mother's house, the place that had always meant safety and love, but now felt tainted by deception. Anjali opened the door with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "Better?" "Why, Mom?" He placed Kumar's evidence on her kitchen table. "Why did you do this?" The color drained from Anjali's face as she realized her scheme had been exposed. "I did it for you," she whispered. "Everything I've ever done has been for you." "No," Raj's voice was firm. "You did it for yourself, because you couldn't bear the thought of sharing me with someone else." "I was protecting you." Anjali tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. "Protecting me? By destroying someone's reputation, by making me doubt the woman I love, the woman who made me happy." "I'm your mother." Anjali's voice rose. "No one will ever love you like I do." "That's the problem, Mom," Raj said quietly. "Your love has become a cage." The weeks that followed were difficult. Raj moved to a different unit at the hospital, giving Priya space while trying to repair the damage his distrust had caused. He started seeing a therapist, trying to understand the complex dynamics that had led to this situation. Priya focused on her work, but her colleagues noticed she didn't smile as much anymore. The children in her ward still made her laugh, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Slowly, very slowly, things began to change. It started with coffee in the hospital cafeteria. Just 10 minutes between their shifts, talking about their patients, their work. Then lunch breaks spent remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. "I miss you," Raj said one day as they walked through the hospital garden. "I miss you too," Priya admitted. "But if we try again, things have to be different." "They will be," he promised. "I'm setting boundaries with my mother. I'm learning to be my own person." Anjali struggled with the changes. The weekly dinners stopped. Her calls went unanswered. She had to watch from a distance as her son built a life that didn't revolve around her. But sometimes life's hardest lessons bring unexpected growth. 6 months later, Anjali started therapy too. She began to understand that true love means wanting happiness for someone, even if that happiness doesn't include you. 1 year later, when Raj and Priya finally got married, Anjali sat quietly in the last row. She watched as her son danced with his bride, saw the joy in his face, and realized that sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love a mother can offer. The relationship between Raj and his mother would never be the same. But maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Sometimes relationships need to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something healthier, something that allows everyone involved to grow and breathe in love without fear of loss.